let's talk about this book in front of you here now, John. It's your face close up. And
Not too close.
It's perfect,
very close to me.
Perfectly close up, because this is a personal book. This is a book that comes from your heart, your brain, your passion and your engagement. And this is your voice put to paper after for a decade, I would say, in the public, you've been talking about racism.
Yeah, it's not, when it says personal, people think it's about my personal experience. It's not about my personal experience, it's about my perception of discrimination. So it's about homophobia, it's about sexism, because what it is about how discrimination started and how it is being continued because of the lies we've been told about different groups of people. Just to give an example, I got on the train to London the other day, got off at Euston, and I just heard these people talking in a building site, and there was the foreman saying to the worker, I didn't see them, I just heard him, and he said, and I don't know what they were talking about, but the foreman said to one of the workers behind the closed doors, he said, well, that's a very northern attitude to have. Now, David, being from up north, knows what people from the south thinks about people up north. Now, that's got nothing to do with race, but that has to do with the perception of somebody who we consider to be inferior. So when it comes to women, when it comes to gay people, when it comes to black people, it's about the lies that have been told about them. So it's a very intersectional book. And a lot of people think it's about telling white people off to say they're racist. It's just not, because the uncomfortable truth is that even we as black people have to think about how do we feel, because in the black community, they could be quite homophobic. In Jamaica and places like that. But we are thinking that our cause is more important than maybe somebody who's gay, a woman, a northerner. And therefore it's a book about discrimination and how we have been conditioned to think that way. And this is all about conditioning, because it is completely understandable. I've had this conversation with you about the language that's used. You know, when now, for example, you can't call people colour, you have to call them black. And you actually said to me that in Norway, you can't call them black.
No, we're not allowed.
So what do you call them?
Well, then you have to say African American.
No, but I'm not American.
I know,
I'm from
and
England.
it's really confusing.
And I'm not African.
It's twisting.
But you can't
my
say
head.
black. That's the point I'm making.
can't.
That's why it's about the intent. And now we're just cancelling people because of people using the wrong language. So it's about just coming up with a sensible way to look at it, rather than, it just being binary, and we all discriminate. And I use the example in the book and always about when, for example, and we're talking about females now in football. And when a female referee walks onto the pitch, the vast majority of men will then think, before they see her ability, the initial thought they'll have is that a better man will be better. Now, when they see how good she is, they'll convince themselves that they don't discriminate because she's great. But your initial thought, and if you say to every man, do you think a man will be better? And they may say, well, let's wait and see how she does, and I want to see how good she is. But I'm just talking about your initial thought, which is what unconscious conditioning is, how we've been conditioned to think. And I put my hand up and I say, I would think a man will be better. Now, I catch myself and I say, I'm wrong to think that. Why do I think that? Because this is the way we've been conditioned to think. But we're not allowed to say that, because then we're going to get cancelled. So therefore, most men will go, keep their mouths shut, and the one person who shouts out will all point the finger at that person and go, but a lot of people think the same thing. And until we can have this honest conversation about the way we feel, nothing will change. All we'll do is just keep pointing the finger at the ones who get caught, and we'll teach people how not to get caught by keeping their mouths shut. And that's not getting rid of racism.
Actually, you're the example of the linesman, and the best lines person in the league is a woman. I think it's Sean Massey.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, but remember, but her first, and this is the problem, you see, because no matter how good she is, a male linesman will make loads of mistakes. And they may have a go at him because he's rubbish, but it won't be because he's a man, it'll be because he's rubbish. Now, she can make only 2 mistakes, much less than a man, and they'll go, women make mistakes.
But she's given her a compliment, she is brilliant, actually. She's got this perception of,
but until we saw how good she was, the initial thought would be, she's not going to be any good. And that's what unconscious bias is. We don't know why we think it, and why we think it is because what have we been told for hundreds of years about women's capabilities? If you're going to go to war, would you rather go to war with a skinhead with tattoos or a gay man beside you? Now, once you see the skinhead is a coward and the gay man is a great fighter, you'll go, oh yeah, I'd rather go with him. But your initial thought is that I'd rather go with the skinhead because he's tougher. And this is what the book is about. Not blaming people for thinking the way they do, but blaming the environment that has brought us up to think that. And as I said, I gave you an example there, and David will know. Coming from up north, you go down south and people believe that people up north have a particular... In Norway, please, if you look at people in Oslo as opposed to people up in your part of the world, I'm sure they have this perception of, well, up there, they're a little bit backwards or whatever, So it's completely understandable, and we have to address it within ourselves, not just point the finger at the ones who get caught.
What I love about your book is how you use so many different examples from your life and from what you've observed, and you read a lot, John, as well. Tell me how much you read over a month, and you're not reading fiction, are you?
No, I don't read fiction at all. And since you've known me, I've used to travel a lot to South Africa and doing all kinds of stuff. And of course, when you're on planes at 280 flights, you can do nothing but read. So I've read a lot of books, and history has shown us that what we're trying to do now is nothing new. And you know, when you have young people and they'll say, oh, this feels different, even in terms of feminism or in terms of racism or in terms of homophobia, this has been happening for hundreds of years, whereby people 50 years ago, 100 years ago, when something happened and they went, yeah, this feels new and something will change. And nothing will change, because the thing about it is that we still live in an elite and a classy society. And what we're actually doing is we're going to create more black elite, as we are now, more female elite, but nothing will change for vast majority of black people and women. So the book is about not changing the perception of the elite. Like, for example, Mo Salah. So when people say Mo Salah is changing the perception of the way that people see Muslims, Mo Salah cannot change that perception. Because if we then say, if Mo Salah then turns out to be rubbish, are we still going to look at Muslims in the same way? No, we won't. And if Mo Salah leaves Liverpool, are the Liverpool fans going to look at Muslims in the same way now? No, Mo Salah's not here anymore, so he's not. So it's while he's here doing well. And the biggest example of that was the players in the Euros, in the final. Because when Gareth Southgate came and said that we're now having a new, diverse England team that's bringing the whole country together, and then 3 of them missed penalties, and then all of a sudden you see what happened. How could that change? How could something as simple as missing a penalty make you change your mind towards black people? Which means that footballers can do nothing about changing perceptions. What we're actually saying is that if they're good, we'll change perceptions, and if they're not, we won't. And if they're good, we're only going to change perceptions towards them, not towards the actual average people living in the cities. And for females as well. Helen Mirren and what's her name? Helen Mirren, another actress over 70. Jessica Lange or whoever, actresses over 70 who get Oscars. Meryl Streep and Helen Mirren, when they win an Oscar, and then they'll go, oh, this is a great victory for women over 70. No, it's not. It's a great victory for those two, because they're the only 2 women over 70 getting Oscars. So they're changing nothing for women over 70. And black people in high positions aren't changing the perception of the average black person. It's just them. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. Have things changed for women? Theresa May. Obama was President of the United States. Have things changed for the average black person? No. And I use as an example the white working class, because they're being neglected. The white working class are being neglected because we're talked about discrimination towards women and black footballers and elitism, but nothing has changed for the white working class in hundreds of years. And so when Alan Sugar, who's working class, Jonathan Ross, they make it into these high positions, do you think the white working class go, yeah, that's good because that's going to help us? They know that it's not, because it's not helped them for hundreds of years. Whereas I look at it from a race perspective, that black people feel that if we get more black people in those positions, that's going to help us. But that's why I use examples throughout history to show, from the French Revolution, American Revolution, which is really an elite wanting to get more power from the king or from the government for themselves, and use the people as an example. It has never worked. So why is it going to work now?
But John, this is such a difficult subject, and it's a minefield to go through. You know, it's so difficult to discuss. And therefore, I find it really brave that you've written this book, because you can so easily step wrong when you try to discuss these subjects. You know?
Because everybody has a different opinion, don't
exactly.
they? On what you can use. And I used just the word black for an example there, where we're now being told that, you can't say coloured, you have to say black, but you're saying in Norway you can't say black. And even not being able to say coloured is an interesting one, because as David will know, in South Africa, Stephen Pienaar and Benny McCarthy, you might not even know, but they are not black, they're coloured. And they will tell you we are coloured. So who are we to tell them that? So the intent is the most important thing.
Yeah, and your intent is obviously to try to broaden our mind and try to address the problems we have.
It's tried to make us be honest.
Yeah.
Because I'll give you an example. If, for example, next week, black players said, you know what? We're not going to walk off the field because these are ignorant people who are trying to get us to cancel the game and to make us feel inferior. So I don't feel inferior, so I'm not going to walk off the field. Gareth Southgate and every one of those white players will say, that's the right thing, yeah, we think you should do that. But because we say we should walk off the field, they've got to back us. And if we say we're not going to walk off the field, they'll back us. But what do they think is the right thing to do? And I can tell you, the vast majority of them would feel that walking off the field is not the right thing to do. But if they say that, they could get cancelled. Taking a knee. Wilfried Zaha doesn't take a knee. Does he get criticised? But if a white player doesn't take a knee, he gets criticised. So it's not a question of, and why it's great to highlight it. So taking a knee can highlight the problem, like passing the red card down in the Champions League for the last 25 years. Nothing's changed, it's just a gesture. It's a good gesture to highlight the problem, but it doesn't change the problem. We have to do something tangible, because the discussion now is not why we're taking a knee and trying to do something about it, it's whether we should or we shouldn't. So all the talk is, should we take a knee? Yes. We don't think you should. We think you should. Yes, you should. No, you shouldn't. But they're not talking about why, and the more we just do gestures without any tangible follow-up. The one person who did a tangible follow-up to anything to do with discrimination or underprivilege was Marcus Rashford. When he changed government policy in 1 week towards underprivileged kids, that's not race, but that's underprivilege. And he changed government policy to feed children all over the country by using his voice, not to say we need more black managers or they've got to get hungry banned because they're throwing bananas on the field, but to say, let's do something that we can help our inner city kids. And he changed government policy. So why are we pointing the finger at people that are hungry? Or a 12-year-old fan who throws a banana on the field. Yes, it's important to change that, but it's much more important to change what's going on right here in our inner cities. And no one's talking about that because we have to be careful who we point the finger at. Because all of these players who are taking a knee, all of these black players who are taking a knee and they're feeling very powerful, and we're changing, we're stopping Hungary is going to be banned and the fans are going to be banned because we're fighting against discrimination and bias, racial bias. I don't hear one of them talk about why there are no black managers, very few black managers. Because they have to be careful who they criticize, you see.
And I want to go back to that. But before I do that, I want to wind all the way back to, you were talking about throwing bananas and you experienced that coming to Liverpool.
No, I experienced that 5 years before I came to Liverpool.
As well,
Watford, of course, Liverpool versus Everton was high profile on television and people were shocked. But that was happening 5-10 years before that. And, it was a high profile game, so it was highlighted, but this is not something that was new. I don't know why people were shocked as if it was the first time.
Yeah, but for you, and I have always found it really powerful how you handled racism in your time and how you talk about how you handle criticism and that sort of attitude towards you and how that's never affecting your performance. And I find
not
that
just
really
my performance,
powerful.
but even my whole life. It never affected me at all. Now, obviously, and the book will tell you, this is where when you have to... Martin Luther King said in 1963 that the shallow understanding of racial bias by good people, is a bigger obstacle to overcome than the total misunderstanding by bad people. What he means by that is the total misunderstanding by bad people are people on Twitter, people who throw bananas on the field, overt racist. They have total misunderstanding of racism or racial bias. They're not the problem. They're few and far between. It is the shallow understanding of good people, meaning everyone else feels that I'm not racist because I won't throw a banana on the field. I'm not sexist because I wouldn't rape a woman. I'm not homophobic because I wouldn't beat up a gay person. But we're somewhere along that line of, okay, I wouldn't throw a banana on the field. However, if I'm in a company, in a club, or I'm walking down the road and some black people come towards me, I'll feel uncomfortable. That's still racial bias. And that's the problem. Not the overt and the obvious things you can see, it's the things that you can't see. So that is why, from my perspective, when I was growing up, I came from an elite family in Jamaica, light-skinned, and you can see what happens in Jamaica and the Caribbean. It's about elite black people discriminating against non-elite black people. That's not racism, but that's elitism. So, and I was part of the elite group. So it wasn't a conscious decision to discriminate against black people in the inner cities because I was a middle-class, light-skinned boy whose family started the Jamaican government, basically. But this is how we've been conditioned to think in terms of superiority and inferiority. So it's not just a white and a black thing. You have white elite people discriminated against white non-elite people. Look at the white working class and what's happening to them. They're being mistreated as well. So when I came to England as an elite person, and I lived in a nice big house. My dad was a diplomat, we had a chauffeur, and then I started playing football, and white working class people who lived in council houses, didn't have jobs, are racially abusing me. I felt superior to them, because my life has shown me that I lived in Mayfair, so why do they feel superior to me? So therefore it didn't bother me, but I completely empathize with maybe Ian Wright or other black people who, would have been working class people who would have been, neglected and their dads couldn't get a job. But that wasn't me. So when people say this is how black people should respond, because the black experience is one of discrimination. Since I've been 17 years old, I was elite before I even came to England. So, but my whole life, but as a footballer at 17 years old, I was an elite person. Now, on a Saturday at 3 o'clock, a banana may come on the field, but Monday to Friday, I could go to Downing Street as an 18-year-old. I could go into all the bars, the restaurants. I could live in a nice house, drive a nice car. Whereas these people who felt superior to me didn't have anything that we are told is a marker of success. Money, access to the higher echelons of society. So why should I feel inferior just because of the color of my skin? Now, I said, that's me. Other people don't feel that way, but we have different experiences.
One of the stories that has made a big impression on me as well, that you've shared with me, is these two fellows on the Kop who thought you were coming to Liverpool, and then you had to wait for half a season before you could come, but the clubs had agreed, but they never spoke about signings before you actually did the deal. Tell me about that. That is.
Well, in fact, it was Charlie who actually told me. You know, Charlie, a friend of mine, because there was a lot of talk. And the thing about it is that these are two old guys, and don't forget, you know, because of the way everyone's been conditioned, and you remember, David will remember, you won't because you weren't here, but of course you look at Love Thy Neighbor and comedies in the 70s where people just had throwaway lines about black people and blah, 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 and it was like, you know, Alf Garnett. So these two guys, when I didn't come to Liverpool in January, when they made a bid for me in 1987, and I came in July, when I didn't come to Liverpool, and they felt that I'd snubbed Liverpool as much as Liverpool knew I was going to come. But of course, my friend used to sit behind them, and they were talking about, well, you know, who does he think he's, you know, because he turned Liverpool down, and we didn't have any black players. Howie Gale is the only one, and, you know, he didn't make it, so black players aren't good enough because they don't like the cold, and, you know, he's from Jamaica, so they can't play, all that kind of stuff, which is, they've been conditioned to think that. But of course, when I then signed, the first 2 games were away from home, because there was a hole in the cup. So we played at Arsenal, we won 2-1, and I played well, and then we played, I can't remember the second game, but we won. And then the first home game was against Oxford, and so it was a new team, because don't forget, Russia had gone, Kenya retired, so, and they were the superstars. How are we going to compete without them? A new team, because Liverpool, and David will tell you, they didn't just sign loads of players every season. So for those two to retire, and for Liverpool to sign me, Peter Beardsley, and Ray Houghton was a huge change, because imagine 3 new players coming into the team. And it was against Oxford, and then I scored a free kick after 15 minutes. And the first one looked at the second one and he said, he's not as black as I thought. Now, obviously, he may have thought that it's just the colour of my skin because I'm quite light-skinned. But that is why I say football is the least racist industry. I'm not talking about in terms of some racist football fans racially abusing people who are on Twitter. I'm talking about in terms of the opportunities that it gives black footballers now. Because of course, there would have been as many black footballers in the 70s who never made it, because the perception of them was they don't like the cold, they're not good enough, and we've seen situations whereby, but since for the last 20 years, you've got 30% black footballers playing in the lower division. So they don't look at your skin color and don't give you an opportunity as they do in real life, in jobs and education and stuff like that. So football, and which other industry, and people probably get me wrong when I say this, there's not another industry where you have a black employee who, and some of them, and they're making good money, and some of them are terrible. Because they're not good footballers because they're black. It's just that, you know, but there's no other industry whereby a black man can earn as much as a white man and be worse than a white man. Whereas in football, there's no discrimination. It doesn't matter whether you're black, you're white, you're Chinese, you're going to be given an opportunity. Now, in terms of the fans racially abusing you now and again, that may happen, but in terms of the opportunities given to 3% black people in England, the only 3%, and there are 30% black footballers earning money, who are elite, who are benefiting by the system that they live in by earning money, driving big cars and living in nice houses. There's no other industry that allows the average black person that opportunity. So this is why we have to be careful when we just focus on them and say how terrible it is for them, when you have the vast majority of black people in the cities not being given opportunities, jobs, education, and no one's talking about them. And that is what the book is about. Forget about us, because we're okay. Now, okay, we want to stop racism, of course, but we are doing okay as footballers and actors and rappers. We're doing well in this society that rewards us. But let us use our voice like Marcus Rashford did to talk about what's happening in the inner cities for our kids. And that's what I talk about for women and for gay people as well.
Yeah, and that was my point, that this is not your personal revenge because you were going through a lot of racism
Not at all. And people going, why is he complaining about it? Because he's a footballer and he made money. I keep saying to people, it is not about me. No. Because I'm fine. And Mo Salah is fine. If there's some racist abuse towards Mo Salah, from a Muslim perspective, every now and again, from somebody in the crowd, Mo Salah is okay.
But then let's move to the manager side of things. Where it's definitely not okay in terms of...
But no one's talking about that, are they?
No, but let's do it. Yeah. Let's do it.
No one's talking about
Where are all the black managers?
And that is understandable, because what you have to do is you have to change the perception. So the equality I'm interested in changing is the equality from a moral and intellectual point of view. And management is about leadership, it's about intellect. So therefore, once we then have said that footballers, black players, black people are physically capable in football, in boxing, in singing, and in all that where you can measure that. But how can you measure someone's intellect? You can't. So when you get a job as a manager, the people who are going to employ you have to believe that you can do the job before they actually see you doing it. Now, when you actually get the job, it may not work out early on, but it's because they have that perception and that idea that you're able to do this job, then they will stick with you, they'll support you, and you'll come out of it. Jurgen, from his first year at Liverpool, when we were probably 30 points off the top, but we knew Jurgen could turn it around. And if that was a black manager, he wouldn't be given that much time. I'm not talking about in terms of Liverpool, but at most jobs. And what I say from our perspective, from a black perspective, is that what we should say as if we want to be managers is that we can't say, if we say we can be as good as any white manager, people are going to go, oh, who do you think you are? You can be as good as Jurgen Klopp and Carlo Ancelotti. We shouldn't say that. We should say we can be as bad as any white manager, which means how many white managers lose their job, get another job, lose their job, get another job. And their color isn't a marker as to how good they are. But if a black manager doesn't do well, they're going to go, see, black men can't be good managers. And that is what we have to then try and overcome, the perception of our worth from an intellectual and moral point of view. And women will be the same thing. A woman can't be a good referee. And that is why we need to have allies within ourselves. Because I did an interview with a female journalist, sports journalist, and she said, why aren't there many black managers? And I said, there are only two possibilities. The first possibility, and in football, any bias or discrimination is unconscious. Because when I went to Celtic, any black manager who's got his job, 100% of the fans, once you get that job, they want you to do well and they support you. Now, when you lose a few matches, that's when they lose faith in you quicker, if you're black or you're a woman, rather than if you're from England, for example, or Spain or Germany. Now, so I said, it's either that there is an unconscious bias, and it's not by the owners of the clubs, it's by society, because the fans are the ones who get the manager the sack. They don't sack you. If the fans love you, and the fans loved Jurgen even when we weren't doing particularly well, they'll stick with you. So either unconscious bias, that's the first thing, or we are not able to be good managers because of the color of our skin. Now, is that a possibility? And she said, no, there could be a third one. I said, what's that? She said, maybe they don't want to be managers. And I went, yeah, that's a possibility. Just like women don't want to be sports journalists, do they? Because how many times are women told, they don't want to be sports journalists? And this is why I'm saying we have to empathize with each other. And just to give you and David will bear me up on this one, to give you the typical example of why that is 100% correct, is because a group of managers who are discriminated against, if any of the top 5 jobs become available, are white English managers. Do you think if Arsenal, Liverpool, Tottenham, Chelsea, Man United become available, there's a white English manager that's going to be given that job? Because the perception, unconsciously, is that foreign managers are better.
Yeah. So
we know that. David Moyes will tell you that. Well, Scottish or whatever, but they'll tell you that. They're not going to get the top jobs because of the perception. So if we know the perception, even to white English managers, is that foreign managers are better at the highest level, why can't we understand that there's a negative perception towards black managers, knowing the history of that? And that is what people have to understand, which is true, because I remember when Houllier probably started it, when he came and was successful at Liverpool, they only wanted French managers. And then after Rafa, we want Spanish managers. After Mourinho, how many Portuguese managers are coming over here, managing Premier League clubs? No one bats an eyelid if they're unsuccessful. You get another one. Whereas if Eddie Howe gets a job and he fails, they're going to go, see, English managers aren't good enough. And that's the unconscious perception we have about everything. And we have to admit it and own it within ourselves.
Yeah, and it was like that when you came to Celtic as well, because when you look back at it, you had such a great winning rate. I think
we had a good rate of 65%. It was the second after Jock Stein at the time. Yeah. And of course, Martin O'Neill came and he got a better one, and Neil Lennon because Rangers got relegated. But of course, we lost to England as Cali Thistle. But the perception was that, it's a disaster. Because of course, I didn't have that trust, because it was like, well, he shouldn't really be here in the first place. So once Larson broke his leg and people got injured, and so it was a disaster waiting to happen. But once again, it's the same thing. And I think we went through that a little bit with Brendan when he came. And I'm glad Brendan's not here because we now got Jurgen. But I think Brendan did a decent job when he was here, and you can see what he's doing now at Leicester and what he's done at Leicester. But once again, British managers, white British managers aren't going to be given any of the top jobs because of the unconscious perception. And even Scottish managers, because after Bill Shankly, Alex Ferguson, Kenny Dalglish, all the clubs wanted a Scottish manager, George Graham. But that was just a perception. They weren't good managers. Good managers are good managers, and now that's now gone. So can you see, apart from David Moyes, do you think any managers who are going to come, any Scottish managers going to get any job even in the Premier League in England? Never mind at the top clubs, because of the unconscious perception. Stevie wouldn't be, obviously, from Liverpool because of the connection. He could be. But I think Stevie would then be at Liverpool because of that connection. But if it wasn't for the Liverpool connection, I don't necessarily feel that Arsenal or Chelsea or one of them would go for him. Obviously Newcastle, because they're struggling. Yeah.
And then you also talk about in the book how it's happening in Africa, where again European managers are more worth than African managers.
this is
and
where,
you felt the same in Jamaica.
In Jamaica, and this is where you can't just talk about it from a black-white perspective. It is the way we have all been conditioned to think. Because in Africa, they will all have white European coaches, the top teams, Nigeria, Ghana, and they will give them more respect. They'll pay them more money, and the players will respond to them better than they respond, because this is a legacy of colonialism and slavery, whereby we have got to feel that there is white superiority. And in Jamaica, it's the same thing. And with me, when I managed the Jamaica national team, we didn't lose a game, and they responded more to me as much as I'm Jamaican, but because I'd been brought up in England and played for England, they saw me as being an English coach. So as much as I'm black and I'm from Jamaica, rather than the local Jamaican coach who they wouldn't respect as much. So that is why the uncomfortable truth is not just about white, black racism. It's about the way that the world is structured to think in terms of superiority and inferiority for the majority of people.
You also say in the book that football isn't the place to start to fix the problem, because a lot of people are asking how can we fix things in football. I've got a couple of questions from people. We have one from Neil here. It says, whilst accepting that football mirrors society, what more do you think football and its administrators could or should do to end racism in the sport?
It can't. We have to get rid of it in society first, because what it can do is overt racism you can end, but how are you going to get, so the fact that there are 4 black managers, how are you going to change that? Because that's not overt and you can't prove that. So it's the stuff that you can't prove, and that's the hardest stuff. When someone goes for a job interview and a white person, a black person, or a man and a woman, and they give the man the job or the white person the job, you can't prove that it's because she was a woman, she's a black person, because you can't prove it, as much as you may know that's the situation. So it's not about, so all football can do is to take care of what it sees, and the overt racism, fairly obvious. You throw a banana on the field, you're ejected. You racially abuse somebody, you go to prison or whatever, but that is not the problem with racism. The problem with racism is the stuff that you can't actually prove, and football has a big issue with that, because how can you prove what is racist and what isn't? Because now, passing laws does nothing. It's been illegal to rape and kill for thousands of years. People are still doing it. So if you want to pass laws to change something, why it can't work is because when a black player gets the ball and he's playing really well, the whole stadium can boo him, because it's not illegal to boo. As much as we know what they're doing, it's because he's black, but is it illegal to boo? No. But let's make booing illegal. Okay, we'll clap. Let's make clapping illegal. We'll do something else. So there's no way you can stop them letting them know exactly what the situation is. So what a lot of the black communities say, the black elite say, is that I don't care how you see me, I care how you treat me. And that's what they say. So they say, let's just put things in place that you have to treat us equally. Now, there are always going to be ways around those laws. From the Reconstruction era after the American Civil War, where black people had the vote, black people were in the Senate in America, but then they knew that they had to get back in bed with their Southern brothers, the white Southern brothers. So of course the Jim Crow's law came in, and black people then went backwards, because the narrative wasn't, I don't care how you see me, it was care how you treat me. So what happens is we have to treat you equally, but then after a while you're going to find ways around not treating you equally. Now, if they did it the other way around, I don't care how you treat me, I care how you see me, is that people will go, okay, I don't care, you don't care how we treat you, so we can continue to treat you unequally, but we have to work on seeing you as equal. So we'll work at seeing you as equal, but we'll continue to treat you unequally. After a while, because we've worked to then say, you know what, we see them as equal, there'll be no laws necessary for us to treat you unequally, because we then see you as equal, and that's the most important thing. So this whole Rooney Rule situation, whereby it came in because in the NFL, they have 3 black coaches in America, so therefore they put the Rooney Rule in, so you have to interview black coaches and you have to do whatever, because you have 3 black coaches 25 years ago. Here we are 25 years later, they've still only got 3 black coaches, but they put something in place. So they said, we're doing something about it. So how come there's still only 3 black coaches? Because laws can't change, we have to change people's perception.
We have Mike King as well. He's, by the way, winning your signed copy of the book.
Is that a fix then? How do you want it already? I thought you had to draw.
I have drawn him out.
Oh, you drawn him out already, okay.
With this particular question, and I like it, but I don't know how to pronounce one of the words, so you'll have to help me with my poor Norwegian. Mr. Barnes is one of the few clear voices when talking about racism. I'm very much looking forward to reading the book, he says. So my question would be, and then you can read the question out loud, please.
I don't know if I can read you writing. Which one is it?
This one here.
Question would be, is there anything in particular that gives you hope that the mentality of those who are prejudiced can change? The only thing that gives me, well, what would give me hope is if people started to be honest about the way they feel. But I understand why people can't, because if you're honest about the way you feel, then you're going to lose your job, you're going to get cancelled. So that's why we need an open and honest conversation. Because if you had an honest conversation, people would say, well, you know what? I just feel more comfortable around white people than black people. Why? Because I have been told that black people, or I feel women, whatever it is. But unless we can have that honest conversation and be allowed to have that conversation, then nothing will change. All we do is keep our mouth shut, and the ones who can't keep their mouth shut will get caught. They'll get cancelled, they'll get fired, and we then convince ourselves that we're getting rid of everybody else. So the only way we can do that is if we have the uncomfortable conversation that is necessary. And we've seen from Greg Clark, who was the FA, and because he said coloured, he got the sack. And it's like his intention was to praise black players, but he said coloured instead of black, and now he's got to resign. It's like the intent is the most important thing. So we're really going about it the wrong way, and we've been doing this for too long, which means that we are going backwards. So until we can start having the honest conversation, and David will know this, whereby I know a lot of friends who work in the media, and they're now very scared about what they say, because even the situation whereby you can't call a black player lazy. So if he doesn't try and run back and he stands there scratching his nose, I remember, and I'm glad a black player was lazy when we played Barcelona, because Mbappe lost the ball in the edge of the box, just scratched his nose and allowed us to score. And the commentator should be able to say he was lazy, but you can't, because you can't call black players lazy. You can't call them powerful. Now, we've seen Adama Traore, and if he is powerful, but you can't say that, because you have to say he's intelligent. So all of this kind of nonsense is really not where we should be going, because we are then going to convince people that, well, we're not calling them lazy anymore. Nothing's changing. Nothing's changing, but we're now using the correct language. So nothing changes, but then we're giving the illusion that things are changing because we're not calling black players lazy anymore or powerful. And that's really not what we should be doing.
John, now that the book is out and you've given it 10 years of your life to share all these thoughts and reflections, to engage people in thinking and reflecting and really looking inwards on yourself, which I think is a powerful thing with this book, because it triggers things in you. You sometimes say things and I go, hang on a minute, but then you have a reason for it. So
we all do that.
You poke us a little bit.
I poke myself. You know, when I'm driving down the road, and I don't know how David feels, but it's probably like me, and some woman cuts him up in the car, and you go, look at that stupid woman, what's she driving for? Whereas a man who would think it's because it's a man, we'd always say never, because we would never admit it publicly. I can admit it publicly because I'm ready to be cancelled and fired. But we all think certain things because that's how we can. But then because I own it, I stop myself and I say, why did I think that? I have to stop thinking that. Whereas if you don't own it within yourself, you will continue to do it and convince yourself it wasn't because she's a woman referee. That's not why I thought she's bad, or it's not because he's gay, it's not because he's black, but it is. And until we own it within ourselves, nothing will change.
How will you take this work forward now? The book is there. What do you do then?
There's not a lot I can do. I hope that people read it and people really internalize and be introspective as to what they think about things. And then maybe what they will do is wherever they then go into whatever industry, whatever job they do, a postman, milkman, and because they have internalized it and thought, well, I can now own my own bias, because we are all biased. We are all biased. But most people will then say, no, we're not, because we believe in equality, and we don't. But there are reasons for it. And if you understood the reasons for it, because of how we've been conditioned to think, look, Scandinavians, the Finns aren't Scandis, are they? The Vikings are the Norwegians. No, it's not. We're the Vikings, or we're the Swedes. Conditioning in terms of inferiority and superiority, because we are the original Vikings or whatever. So everybody has that. Everybody has that within themselves. And until we accept it and understand why we feel the way we do, because of the rubbish that we have been told about our superiority over the next person's superiority, which isn't based on anything real. And you know what will happen? When we get rid of racism, sexism, homophobia, the vast majority of black people, women, and gay people will still be exactly where they are. But they won't be there because they're black, because they're gay, because they're women. That is when we will have real equal opportunities, whereby if you want to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to work and work harder, you will get rewarded better than somebody else. Not because you're gay, not because you're a woman, not because you're black, you will be inferior, but because you can't be bothered. And he would know this at Liverpool, that was Liverpool's thing. You work hard in training, never mind who you are. If Ian Rush and Kenny Dalglish doesn't want to work hard in training, they're not going to play. So therefore, you get out of it what you put into it. And it's not based on where you're from. It's not based on your color. It's not based on your gender. And that is what life should be. They reward you for the effort you put in. But at this moment in time, there's still people being rewarded or not being rewarded based on the fact that, well, she's a female ref, so she shouldn't really be reffing a European Cup final. Well, she's better than men, but she shouldn't because she's a woman. And this is, so therefore, we're never going to have equality, because life isn't equal. Because there are certain people who have an innate quality, which is better than other people. But it shouldn't be based on their race, their gender, and lots of other dynamics. I mean, the best player in the world could be from Norway. Best player in the world. You're not going to spend 100 million pounds on him and have to pay him 500 grand a week because he's from Norway.
Oh, just wait and see what Liverpool will cash up with Haaland.
No, but he's coming from Germany, isn't he? You think he was doing
No,
this
he's
in
not.
No, but if he was playing this one in Norway, you think they'd have to spend
Oh, yeah,
100 million
definitely.
pounds on
No,
him. They'd
they
say,
wouldn't.
here's 5 million pounds.
Yeah, true. David, you've been listening to John now. What you take from his engagement and the passion he has for the subject?
Well, John has always come across as very passionate towards this and speaks a huge amount of sense. So far for me to sort of pick any holes in it or disagree, I think it's right. It's not going to repair itself quickly, but you can only do your own little bit, and I think you appeal to everybody to contribute to change and how to see things. I mean, life, you know, the handicaps that befall your family, I think gives you a better understanding of things. You have a sort of a handicapped child or somebody within the family. One thing that you're then understanding of how they should be treated and all these different things. Your opinion changes, so it's up to us all, I think, to make changes and to see how you can be a better person and more equal and treat each other as equals. But it's hard. I wouldn't want to try and pontificate and try and do things. But I think life experiences have made me a more tolerant person. But it's up to ourselves. I don't think you can force it upon people, because, as John says, people will find their way around it to mask exactly how you're going to change it. You know, perception. You know, you create a perception, and that's not necessarily. That's not the answer, is it? You know,
Well, that is where I think intersectionality is important, because everyone has their crusade. Now, look, what's the hot topic now? Climate change. Now, as much as black people say, well, race is the biggest topic, some women will say, no, sexism, homophobia, climate change. And really, climate change is the biggest, because that's the future of everybody, black, white, brown, Muslims. So climate change could be, but from a black perspective, we'll say, no, because we've got to do this. You know what I mean? So that is why we have to be allies of each other and not look to just talk about our own cause. And that is why, I'm having a hard problem with people on both ends of the spectrum. A lot of black people go, he's saying that nothing is racist. And a lot of white people are going, he's saying everything is racist. Because for some black people, everything is racist. And for some white people, nothing's racist. So I say, argue amongst yourself. Which one am I? That's why you have to be very balanced in the outlook on it. And if you understand the history of, since the last 500 years, and you understand the history of Scandinavia, and you look at Norway, and you know that they're very socialistic in their attitudes anyway for hundreds of years. That is why it's a different society. And then you look at Venezuela, and that is why it is not just a class, a race, a gender thing. It's really, in the last 400 years, we have been indoctrinated by the media to think in terms of, look at communism, for example. People say it's the best thing. People say, no, capitalism is better. What's the reality? The reality is how we have been conditioned to think. And that is why it's a real human thing about just looking at yourself and forget about what you have been taught. Just think about it from a human perspective in terms of what's right and what's wrong. So David's right in terms of everybody has to look at themselves and not just think about themselves. And I use from a racial perspective the black footballers. Because as I said, they're really powerful talking about discrimination and how terrible it is, but I haven't heard one of them question why there are no black managers. Because they have to be careful who they upset. Because you don't upset the clubs, and so therefore, so I said, how powerful are they really? Because they're part of an elite system who are rewarded by the system. So therefore, they have to be very careful who they upset. So anyway, read it.
Read it, everyone. I highly recommend it. It's called The Uncomfortable Truth About Racism, and it's just out, and it's got John's lovely but serious face on the cover, and it's taken him 10 years of dedication and knowledge and passion to get it out there. John, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts with us at the podcast.
Especially about Liverpool versus Atletico Madrid. And let's hope we beat West Ham.
Yes. And David, thank you so much as well for joining us today.
Yeah, it's good to hear. Always good to hear John's views, and he speaks so well and so passionate about it.